Anyone else in the start sheet? Yeah, I'm just gonna leave the start sheets here. Okay. And, okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. What? Yeah, Tehillim, yeah, right here. We take a short sheet and listen to Tanakh, okay? Or Tehillim is fine for today. Let me see. I'll print. Yeah, okay. I'm working on thinking, but England was England. Okay, so, good morning, Chodesh Tov. It is a pleasure to be here. And my name is Yosefa. My name is Yosefa, and I'm really excited about, so I see a lot of new faces, which is really wonderful, and some returning faces, which is always wonderful. A little bit about what we're going to be doing this semester. This is a one semester class this year. I don't remember what is on the second semester of this one. I don't remember. So I guess someone else is more up to them if they go for me. So we are going to be looking at Tehillim. I'll say that last year I had intended on teaching sort of like a half a semester of Tehillim, but then Shir Shirim sort of swept us away, and we had like 2 classes in Tehillim, and then that was it. So this is sort of more of an attempt to properly do Tehillim. We'll have 14 classes, and today will be an introduction to the book of Tehillim, to sort of like map it out, get a sense of what we're talking about, a little bit about authorship and about the way that Tanakh writes poetry. And then we'll jump right in to Mizmorei Tehillim. We'll start next week. Still haven't decided which one, but we'll start next week and we'll go forward. I'll also tell you the behind the scenes a little bit of this class, which is that I'm supposed to be writing the Koran book at Tehillim. Okay, so which is a project I accepted last year. I can't say that so much has happened since I accepted the project. And so for me, part of this class is also like a laboratory of trying to share with you thoughts and readings that I want to put forward in the book, and to see what you think, how you feel, what's relatable, what's not. So like your input is invaluable. So please share it. Again, it's only 14 classes. We believe it's 150 per team. We'll obviously only do a little taste. The book itself also is going to be probably 17 essays. It's not going to be, I don't know, 150. That's not my current goal of this project. So, so that's sort of like the background to a lot of this. Like hopefully it can serve as a basis for a bigger project. For those who don't know me, I'll just introduce myself, who I am. Yosefa, in Matan, I've been here 13 years. Started off as a student, and then I'm on faculty. I think it's in my 11th year teaching. I host a podcast for Matan, which I will unabashedly self-promote. I think it's awesome. I'm just saying.
Great. That's great. I was introduced to you.
Yeah, okay. So I have to say, there are projects you have in your life that are meaningful, and you have projects you have in your life that you just want to get through. And the podcast for me is like a never-ending, meaningful exploration and like amazing conversations. I guess I've discovered my favorite way of communicating with people, to be quite honest. Like, very, very simply. With teaching, I'm by nature, people don't believe, but by nature I'm a bit more of an introvert. So teaching to me is always a little bit embarrassing. Even though I know I do it and I always seem confident, but like honestly, internally, I'm totally embarrassed. But podcasting to me is like the perfect alchemy, because like I get to talk to people No one has to see me. By the way, most time I'm wearing pajamas, and like, no, actually, when I record it, I'm, with people and looking proper, but I love conversation, so. So I do the podcast, that's my fun stuff. My main thing is on Arami from Gallows. Arami is like a Rebbe, like a Shir Rebbe. I teach Israeli women, I teach Hebrew most of the week. And that's also an amazing, meaningful work, really, I get, mamash. Yeah, it's an amazing group there, and there's work just like visiting and walking around. So I'm there, and a little work for Herzog, with GXP teachers, and on the daily grind, I go to halakha. So I need to answer halakha questions in Shamida and preach parot very regularly, and like the whole world of women's health, sexuality is something that it's like a side hat. It's not really a side hat. It's kind of like a big hat, but it just sort of fits into the fabric of the daily life. And I have 4 daughters. My husband,
spare time.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, definitely not. Once many years ago, I could have said that. Now it's not. It's just a main thing already. But you're also doing everything the same. Anyway, that's me. I was just on with my husband. We're finding out people there tomorrow after a week and a half, and I'm really looking forward to that because apparently one person can't be 2 people. So looking forward to that. Okay, with that instruction. We're going to get started. We are in the book of Tehillim. Now, the book of Tehillim does not have stories in it. I'm a big story person, which is why, like, for many years, Tehillim is not something that I've taught. I love story. I think in story. I think in narrative to me is just like, I don't know, just like the best bed you can ever lie down in. And so Tehillim is not that at all. But what interests me in Tehillim, or where I really want to go with it, is to really get a sense of the inner dialogues that the writers of Tehillim, I'll explain the sentence, the writers, okay? But to get a sense of the inner dialogue, like the religious, theological journeys that Pirkei Tehillim take us on. It's a book of tefillot in the most basic form. It's a book of tefillot, and sometimes when we look at it sort of too elevated and we assume it's like telling us how the world has to be, I find it actually makes, like, we'll look at it like a book of Nebuah. So in a minute, we'll talk about how the different Rishonim saw the book of Tehillim. But when we look at it as a book of almost like prophecy, I actually feel that it makes Tehillim sometimes less relatable, because Tehillim is as I said, it's a book of tefillot that is deeply entrenched in the world that it's being expressed in. And so some of the categories of how people are spoken about each other are super different than how we would ever talk. I mean, the amount of time that people are called evil and Sadiqim, Rasha'im in the book of Tehillim, it's hard language. And we don't speak like that so much today, and we would almost feel embarrassed. I mean, if you're wrong, but I think we would almost feel embarrassed if we don't call people Rasha'im in that kind of way. Again, peers. If the book is talking about peers who are Rasha'im, not like terrorists, okay, like peers or Tehillim. And there's a lot of language in Tehillim that very often makes it feel very, very, very far from us. And so one of my goals in studying Tehillim for myself first, because I think that it has to be relatable for me, if we can ever make it relatable for everybody else, is to try and sort of bridge that gap between the language that can seem sort of far and these, to me, what are their internal explorations of a person's relationship with God. It's like kind of like informal theology, okay? It's not like the book of Eov, okay, where somebody thought systematically about what kind of theology they want to put into the world. The Tehillim is much more personal, and it takes on the poetic form, but I really believe that if we mine the different Mizmorim, that if we mine the different Mizmorim, the different Psalms for what they're really trying to talk about, then like all Tanakh, they explore things that are eternal. Okay, so that's my goal, which I'll tell you why I'm telling you that. So for example, what I'm probably not going to bring at all in this course are Mizmorim that explore events in David's life, for example. Meaning I'm not looking at the more historical Mizmorim for now. I'll talk in a minute about different kinds of Mizmorim. I'm really looking at ones that are going to express like a really personal point for the speaker. Okay, so in, let's say, the 14 Mizraim or 13 Mizraim that we'll study, those are the ones that I'm looking at, and those are the ones that in general, sort of I want to be pulled into. And when you have 150 poems to choose from, you choose which of them you want to be drawn into. Okay, so there's a lot more to learn, and after we have this course, after we completed the director's training, we can still keep learning to read for another 3 years approximately. But that being said, that's sort of the angle that I want to take. So first I wanted to just physically become familiar with the book of Tehillim. Now, right, be familiar, we read it by the kotel, or we see other people reading by the kotel and wondering why they're crying, or, all these different ways that we come in contact with the book of Tehillim. I largely, by the way, growing up, felt like Tehillim was just this book. They're like, I couldn't understand any of it. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm alone on this, but like, biblical poetry, I get the beat, I understand that word, I maybe know what the word means more is, but like, it's kind of Chinese a little bit, okay? And because it's biblical poetry and it's written like this, okay, it's impossible to understand, which is why in most of our classes will have a PowerPoint, okay? Today's PowerPoint is gonna be for a different purpose, but we're gonna have a PowerPoint because you can't understand biblical poetry when it's written like this, you miss all of the poetry, okay? If it's not, it's just for space saving, okay? Meaning it is very clear that the poets of Sefer Tehillim intended it to be written as poetry, okay? And we'll talk about what are those marks of the poetry. But in terms of how it gets saved for posterity, it's just saved in a way that saves paper. I mean, they didn't even have paper back then, right? But if we want to learn it well, like if we want to learn Shir like we did last year, we want to learn Shirat Hayam, okay, the Song of the Sea, it needs to be put into poetic form so we could see how it's supposed to be read, what are the poetic plays in the poem, and for it to make basic sense.
Is it intended to be spoken or maybe even sung?
It's a wonderful, wonderful question. Save it for 5 minutes and we'll talk about it, okay? It's a great question. So first, the word Tehillim, okay, my problem is now I can't really write on the board, okay, because of that, so we'll survive. The word Tehillim is most likely a different form of the word Tehillot, okay, or Tehillah, which means praises. It's a question of how Tehillah, right, in feminine, Rabim form and feminine collective should be Tehillot. It's a question why it became Tehillim. It's a little bit like Tefillin, okay, which also probably should have been not Tefillin also, but it's from the word Tehillah or from the word Halil. And so it's a book of praises. And as I said, I think it's best to find as a book, it's basically a sidur, okay? It's basically a sidur of different personal prayers that are offered up to God. And the book of Tehillim, we have 2 ways to divide it up, okay? First, most basically, is that it's divided into 150 psalms, 150 different Mizmorim. I want to say 150 question mark, okay? Because some of these Mizmorim, we have traditions that they actually are one Mizmor, like Chazal even suggests that the first and second Mizmor are actually one, and there's traditions that have different Mizmorim like that. And so we'll say 150, but like it's not a big deal if it was 149 or maybe 148. But big adult 150 is relatively the accurate number. Well, we have question marks regarding some of them if they really should be one more put together. And the other main division that we have of the book is that it gets divided into how many subbooks? 5, okay? And that is clearly meant to be some sort of imitation or mirroring of the 5 books of the Torah. Yeah.
So
Tell me your name though.
my name is Khan.
Connie.
Yeah. So the sub books, who made these divisions? Can you say that?
Okay, so it's a great question. So we don't totally know who made the subdivisions of the 5 books. The 150, or that each means more is separate. It seems that they were composed separately. Okay, but we have a question if let's say one means more somehow got preserved as 2 separate, but initially was supposed to be 1. But they're initially written as separate Mizmorim. I'll tell you also another interesting way to think about Mizmorim Tehillim is to look at the Mizmorim that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, you have many of the Mizmorim that were found. You also have Mizmorim that are found there that are not in the 150, that were definitely written later. Okay, likely by those who were living in that area. But they were preserved also there as separate Mizraim. So they were definitely written as separate pieces, and nobody sat down and wrote all 150 in one lifetime or in one sitting, but eventually they make their way into some sort of collection.
And when they were put in the collection right away, they were put in experience of by.
No, likely not, likely not. I'll give you another example. So this week on an email list that I'm on, somebody asked, does anybody have some sort of division of what your page should be said for each parsha? Okay, now nobody responded for a few days. And then the woman who asked the question responded herself with some random copy of something she really found in some like book or the internet. I don't know where it was from. Somebody at some point sat down with the book of Tehillim and divided it up according to parshiot. This is not like an ancient division.
What do you
Okay?
mean according to Parshiot?
Meaning how many Mizraim you could say for each parsha, okay? And I didn't look enough in the email to see if they chose Mizraim that were somehow related to the parsha. I didn't get that far, okay? But the point is that that's definitely something much more recent, okay? We're in 5 books. The 5 books is definitely somehow, I believe, in the late Second Temple period, but I don't know any of this, where that tradition exactly comes from of the 5 books.
Right.
Okay.
And in my Tehillim, it's divided up on days.
Right, so that's also, I don't know exactly when that comes up, but it's much
Much more recent.
yeah, much more recent. And again, there are all different ways that we try and make Tehillim accessible or something that we integrate into our life. So what I wanted to notice about the division to 5 books, I've also seen some effort to try and like actually compare the content of each book to see how it relates to the book in the Torah. To me, it's a very, very far-fetched theory. I think much more likely is that the division to 5 books wanted to raise the holiness level of the book of Tehillim, meaning let us look at it as sort of like a mirroring of the Torah. It will elevate the way that we view Tehillim, but making sure that we see them as these elevated poems and not something that is, just in the Tehillim. So, for example, look at 41 or Mem Aleph. Okay, I want you to see where, let's say, book 1 ends. Every single time, every time we get to the end of a book of Tehillim, there is in fancy academic language what we call a doxology, doxology, which means praising of God, a little bit like a hallelujah. Okay, so the end here, which we have at the end of all of the books, is Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael min ha'olam v'ad ha'olam, amen v'amen. And so that clearly marks 41, Mem Aleph, okay? That clearly marks the end of the book. Now, what I'll answer to Connie is that, is that an integral part of that particular mizmor, or was it perhaps added on when it wanted to support the division to 5 books, okay? So most will think that it was likely added on to support the division into 5 books. It's not an integral part of mizmor Mem Aleph. Let's just see one more, just to, you believe me that it exists in all the places. Look in Ayin Bet 72. The books are not of equal length, okay? Mamash not of equal length. So at the end of Ayin Bet of Mizmor 72, we have the same thing. We have already in Pasuk Yud Ubaruch Shem Kivodo Leolam Vayimalech Vodo Et Kol Haaretz Amen V'Amen. And then it says Kalu Tfilot David Ben Yishai, which is very interesting, which needs to say like this is the end of David's tefillot, okay? So then if we are there, we have to ask this question, well, does David ever speak again in the Mizmorim? The next grouping of Mizmorim all say Mizmor LaAsaf. It's a different collection of Mizmorim that are not attributed to David. Okay, well, we'll come back to the question of Davidic authorship in a few moments. Let's just see one more. Look in 89, okay, take tips.
Are there any more of David throughout the rest of the season?
There. No, yeah, there are. Like, for example, Stam 103 is the David Balchin. There are, but clearly that means more was clothing whatever initially was a smaller grouping of Mizmorim. Okay, but when it got integrated with 150, it's not exactly the end of what of all of the ones attributed to it. Okay, so just what do you say? Take tits 89. Sorry, I missed 89. Okay, so again we have Baruch Adonai Olam Amen V'Amen. Okay, we have the same ending, and that ending sort of lets us know we've come to the end of the grouping. But again, there's been a lot of questions or explorations about, what's the significance of this division. Again, for the sake of our study this year, we're not really going to pay so much attention to it. Right now, I just want us to see the physical structure and the physical setup of how Tehillim is organized. Okay, so let's go to our source sheet for a minute to talk a little bit about authorship and about how, I don't think I took the source sheet. No, there's more on that. No, but also the family. I was probably make more copies. Oh, we're live streams. Goodness, no pressure. Okay, so wait 1 second till we get back to Kathy's notes. This is actually my notes, which I think I'm gonna keep. Hold on, I just didn't bring it back to the notes. Oh, draft, okay. I appreciate it. I'm about 2 years away from a draft, but I appreciate it. I'm actually right now trying to, I'm hopefully, so that I'm publishing like a little essay on Tehillim in tradition. So, I mean, it'll come out, but hopefully that'll happen. I'm just waiting for more sheets. Who else is making a sheet? Okay. Yeah, we're making more of it. Should I tell a joke in the meantime? I have no joke. I'm not funny.
Tanya, can you speak a little bit slower?
Yosefa, yeah, sure.
Yosefa, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, I can speak slower. I'll try my best. Yes, thanks. We'll start with the first hand. I'm gonna come back in a minute. Okay. So what we have on our source sheet is, I want to address the question of the level of kedusha, okay, within the Masoret Chazal and of our Rishonim, the level of kedusha of Tehillim, and also the question of authorship, because I want to make sure that whatever phrasing I use is going to fit somewhat, to the sensitivities of everybody here. So I brought us a number of sources, all of them traditional. I will say that in my own study of Tehillim, I benefit tremendously from a lot of academic study of Tehillim. I will say that among the Rishonim, the Radak, Ibn Ezra, the Meiri, are invaluable resources. Their commentaries on Tehillim are excellent and really necessary, and obviously, of course, Chazal. Okay, we'll start with the first one. I'll take it on. Radak. Okay, the Radak. So again, two questions we're looking to try to address is who wrote Tehillim and what is its level of kedusha. Okay. ונבאר אנחנו מעט מן ההפרש אשר אין בין הנבואה ורוח הקודש. Okay, so we're going to explain what is Thank you. Okay. So what is the difference between Nebuah and Ruach HaKodesh? Now, in other classes or other semesters, we do a whole introduction about what is prophecy, but that's not our topic this year because we're going to be talking about Ruach HaKodesh. So here's a very brief introduction by the Radak, which to me sort of sums up everything one needs to know. Number one, yeah. כי הנבואה הוא דבר בא לאדם חכם ושלם במידותיו, ותבוא לו הנבואה בחלום. ובעת תביאהו הנבואה בהקיץ, יתבטלו כוחותיו ההרגשיות, ויהיה מסולק מכל דרכי העולם הזה. אני אגיד ראשית, במקום סביר ושמחה, אני אומר סביר, Okay, so Radak here, I'll translate, don't worry. Radak here brings what is sort of the classic Chazal opinion about what a prophet is. There's a lot of different ways to define what a prophet is, and Tanakh itself supports a whole spectrum of concepts. Yeah, also there being a perfect individual, that's something that Chazal put forward in a few places in the Gemara, whereas that's not clear at all from a lot of people who were prophets that they were perfect individuals, including even just Amos, for example, in Perek Zayin and Sefer Amos and Treasar, who says like, I was just in the orchard one day doing my work and God just sort of blew, bowled me over, right? He wasn't prepared. He didn't seem like he particularly was interested in this prophecy. So the idea of Chazal, you have to be perfected in your midot, is a theory, I think, more in how to achieve prophecy, but it doesn't always answer why everybody was chosen as prophet. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So he brings that idea, that you have to be a perfected individual, and it will come to you in a dream. And if it comes to you when you're awake, then basically all of your physical senses will be like annulled in that particular moment. You're not able to actually like be in communication with the physical world. ויראה במראה הנבואה כאילו איש מדבר עמו ויאמר לו כך וכך. או יראה דמיונות במראה ההיא, או לא יראה שום תמונה אלא ישמע קול מדבר עמו. Right? He gives 3 options of what you can see. The Rambam gives like 11, by the way, but he gives 3 options. Either you'll be, you'll see something, you'll see a person speaking to you in a dream, or you'll see an image, which you'll have to then comment and understand what the image is trying to tell you. Or the third option, which is you won't see anything, you'll just hear a voice talking to you. Think Shmuel, right? In the Mishkan. Okay. So all different options of how prophecy can happen. That's prophecy. We're trying to get through Ruach HaKodesh. The Ruach HaKodesh הוא שיהיה האדם השלם, מתעסק בדברי האלוהים, שלם בכל הרגשותיו, ולא תתבטל אחת מהם, ומדבר מה שמדבר כדרך בני אדם, אלא שמעוררת אותו רוח עליוני, ותופיע הדברים על לשונו דברי שבח והודאה לאל, או דברי שכל ומוסרים. So how does he explain what it is to get Ruach HaKodesh? My best English translation is it's a divine charisma, but let's translate exactly what he says. That Ruach HaKodesh is basically that you are a relatively perfect individual, but I wanted to say the difference between being mitasek mishu shalem, that's mitasek b'divrei Elohim, meaning you're a really great person and you're engaged in like spiritual matters, is a little bit of a lower level than saying mishu shu shalem b'midotav, which is how he defined a prophet. A prophet is someone who is like utterly perfect, and a person who gets Ruach HaKodesh is somebody who is a whole person, which again we can try and figure out what that exactly means for the Radak. And he's somebody who's currently engaged in spiritual endeavors. Maybe that means limud Torah, maybe that means he's meditating, he doesn't define. And he is someone who is emotionally perfected. I'll tell you, by the way, that he likely means that he's not an angry person, because that's the main emotion that Chazal think, well, in general, right, takes us out of this world, but also removes us from anything that is spiritual. By the way, it's interesting, I'll just say in my own life, I feel that feeling physically sick is something that like removes me from spiritual endeavors. I'm sure that that's not a universal experience, but when I'm not feeling well, I have a very hard time doing anything that involves like the spirit, because I feel like it makes me very stuck in the physical. So it's interesting to me. They don't speak about that here, but I'm just sharing a personal thought. That to me, that's what I experience. Something that like removes me from having any interest in anything spiritual is feeling ill. Okay, and he says below, and what happens is that a person speaks however they speak, meaning it's not some elevated speech per se. They're not like all of a sudden thrown into this like deep sleep. They're communicating, but it's done from a place of a ruach eliyoni. It's this elevated spirit that's speaking from inside of them. Again, it's what I call divine charisma. And what comes out of him are either, because that's what we have in the book of Tanakh, they're either words of praise, i.e. Tehillim, or they're divrei sechel u'musar, or they're wisdom literature, right? Because those are basically, if you take all the things we have in Tanakh that are called Ketuvim, it's either, Sifrei Shlomo, or you have Tehillim. But he would also classify that. Ezra Nehemiah would also be to him also divrei Ketuvim. That's an interesting question in itself. Ezra and Nehemiah, which according to Chazal are one book, are really written in a very different style, but we'll leave it on the side for now. Gam yidaber al atidot, he might also do future predicting. בסיוע אלוהי על רוחו המדברת, ובזה הרוח נאמר ספר תהילים זה. Okay, and he says that he might speak in the future, and he has sort of a divine assistant that helps him speak. But again, it's similar to prophecy, but it's not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing. It doesn't have to be as perfect. He doesn't have to be like knocked out, but think about like, do you have to be under anesthesia or can you be awake, right? Or can you be literally awakened in this world? So with Ruach HaKodesh, you'll be awakened in this world. And he says, this is the spirit in which Sefer Tehillim was written. Okay, so Sefer Tehillim is not a book of prophecy. It may speak about things in the future, but it's something that was written with a divine charisma and elevated spirit. Yeah.
So we know that we no longer have Nebuah. Do we still believe in Nebuah?
Yeah. So the book, first of all, says we totally could have Nebuah, but totally, I think we still go for 100%. I mean, I'll tell you about a personal spin on Ruach HaKodesh. You could totally do it again this one, but when people are like creatives, people who are creating, manage to create something that strikes a chord with like millions of people around the world. To me, that's nothing that has to be explained as a kind of like Ruach HaKodesh. If I take like you guys know, but take like someone like Hanan Ben Ari. I'm just going to take an example. He would never say it Ruach HaKodesh, okay? But or take, you know, I'm trying to think of like, I don't know, people like here, Brene Brown, or like these like books or musicians. Yeah. So you have like creatives, book authors, musicians who like create something that strikes a chord with people all over the world. I think about it in terms of kind of like a Ruach HaKodesh in the sense that they've managed to touch at something that's so universal that they like touched at the core of humanity. To me, that is something that I look at it as a spiritual endeavor, like 100%. You know, when he's writing about Amen al Hayeladim Shali, and like it's something that resonates. I mean, I know the song. Am I speaking just to myself? If you don't know it, then you need to Google that. Much more than Sefer Tehillim. So yeah. Hanan Ben Ari, Amen al Hayeladim Shali, where you basically speak about like how you spend your life worrying about your children, praying to be okay is a beautiful image where the heart only has 4 chambers. You need so many more to like worry about your children. Anyway, it's a terrible translation from Hebrew, but it's you know, people I'm obviously a little bit more abreast of with Israeli creators than I am with people who are speaking in English, but you can fill in your own people. Who am I reading? Am I now reading Bittersweet? Anyone read that book? Okay. So I just listened to the podcast, Susan Cain, I think, right? So there are these people that are writing things and are striking up a conversation or moving people in a way that they're touching at the core of humanity. I'll say one other thing before I get back to Tehillim, that I stole that quote from, I remember her name, from Susan Monkid, who wrote Secret Life of Bees. Did I get that? Yeah. Secret Life of Bees and many other books. Okay. A lot of like of spiritual books, not all Jewish, a lot of the spiritual books. And I stole that quote from her. She said that in a podcast interview once. I like listening to podcasts and making them. So, and she said that one of the best pieces of advice she ever got, I think it was many, many years ago, was write, not necessarily spill your own personal guts, but write as personal as you ever can, because the more personal you write about what you're actually feeling, the more likely you are to tap into a universal truth that most people feel. Anyway, so to me is a form of Ruach HaKodesh, but that's not really book right. But book thinks that we could have Nebuah very easily. You wrote that, 130 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, totally. That's something that people can achieve and can aim for. The Rambam, of course, also famously felt that Nebuah was something that people could achieve. But I feel like when people receive creative impulses, like that's Ruach HaKodesh.
For sure.
What else is that? You know what I'm saying? What is a muse? Like that's a very poor Greek, garb to describe to me what is Ruach HaKodesh. Not poor. It's just a Greek garb. It's just we have another way to describe it. I didn't do that.
Just you could also I just once heard this quote that when like in the closer times of the Messianic age, like everyone will experience Ruach HaKodesh. You know where that goes from?
So no, I have to look it up more. I mean, there's a lot though of quotes like that. There's a lot of quotes about Kufat Mashiach, which I'm not going to talk about. A lot of quotes about Kufat Mashiach, different things that have been said. A lot of them are ultimately give like words and hope to things that people want to see in the world now. So I don't know how much of the time something like we have to believe in, or it's something that people want to see happen in the future. So I see a lot of people around with a lot of creative impulses. So
I'm just curious, like with what you said, like, so I resonate with the, inspiration, creative inspiration, Hanan Ben Ari's song, maybe Ishai Rigo's song.
Yeah.
But do you think there's a distinction between like, Ruach HaKodesh, Shel David HaMelech? Like, is there a distinction here?
yeah, I mean, I think traditionally we would say that there's a certain distinction. I'm just saying that I think that it might be some similar stuff. You
Right,
know,
okay, okay.
and also that ways of expression have changed, like people don't express themselves in biblical poetry anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like they express themselves no, I'm saying that's not what people are writing, you know, they express themselves in song, they express themselves in other kinds of poems. Poetry slam is another kind of expression, like there's different kinds of expression. Would I say that it's traditionally going to be held in the same level as the paragraph community? No, but I'm not sure if I really generally would sign on a belief that I think that at their essence, it's really made of different stuff.
Right, it's like maybe a Ruach.
Which I would say here, but maybe not say in a more. People don't me for that, but yeah. Okay, but that's my honest answer. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. Let's look at the Ibn Ezra source number 2. And here he gets to the question of Davidic authorship, okay? This is his introduction to his commentary on Tehillim, as was the Radak's comment before. Their introductions are longer. I just took a piece that was relevant to what I want to talk about today. Meaning, I think like Chazal, כי זה ספר כולו נאמר ברוח הקודש, אוקיי? בכל מזמור כתוב בראשו לדוד, הוא לדוד או לאחד מן המשוררים המתנבאים על דוד. He said, this is already different than a lot of what we think we were supposed to believe about Sefer Tehillim, that every time that it says, mizmor leDavid, I think it's 49 of them, but I have to look back at the number. Every time it says it, it either was written by David or was written by another poet who was writing about David. Okay, which is two different things. And he says, Al derech, אבל no, it's not. כן, הדרך לשלמה, אלוהים משפטיך למלך תן, שגם הוא לאחד מן המשוררים על שלמה. Okay, so one of the mizmorim that starts with Shlomo, either it wasn't Shlomo writing it, but it was someone else writing, okay, about Shlomo, praising Shlomo. And Tfilah leMoshe, hu leMoshe, which by the way is going to be very different than, let's say, the Gemara later, which will say that they wrote those mizmorim, right? One way you could say it, the Tfilah leMoshe is that Moshe wrote that mizmor, whereas Ibn Ezra is saying, no, somebody wrote that mizmor and dedicated it to Moshe. Okay, that's two different ways of explaining the opening, the koteret, or the topic sentence of the mizmor. I'm skipping, he continues on, Uvnei Korach, these are all different names that are open up different mizmorim. וכולם היו בימי דוד, וכתוב על הימן חוזה המלך ולשלמה, לאחר המתנבאים על שלמה או על המשיח בנו, כאשר נקרא שמו, ודוד עבדי נשיא להם לעולם, הדרך ואתה אל תירא עבדי יעקב. Okay, so he said that all these mizmorim were first of all written by different people, and sometimes we can understand that it was written to dedicate towards them, but they were, as he says, all in the period of the Bimana. Okay, that's Hashub. And then he continues, והמזמורים שאין כתוב בראשם שם אדם, right? There's none of the many mizmorim have no, I think over 70, have no attribution, no authorial attribution that they're in their opening sentence. ייתכן שאינם לדוד. אולי הם לדוד כמזמור הודו להשם קראו בשמו, שאין שם דוד והוא לדוד. He said maybe it might be dedicated to David, but we don't have to think that it was from David. וזה מפורש כדברי ימים, כי דוד חיברו על אהרון ונתנו לאסף ושלום. I will leave that example for now, but again, this idea that there were certain mizmorim of Sheva that were written by David, and we have Masorah that they were written by David specifically. Okay, so already the Ibn Ezra presents sort of like a little bit of a range. He says that all of it. You have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to I'll take it. So all of them were written be'erech in the Tkufa of David, or possibly of his son, but not all of them are written by David, and some of them are just dedicated to David. Even when it says the David Mizmor at the opening of the Mizmor. Yeah.
So then why do we say that? I mean, maybe we don't, but I only believe the paper camera was written by.
Right, so I want to kind of want to, like make that more realistic. Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying it wasn't necessarily written by people in the time of that.
That's Ibn Ezra. I'm about to make it more complicated.
Oh, okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's Ibn Ezra. Okay, and I'm bringing super traditional sources. Meaning, obviously, academic literature doesn't think that they think most of it was written much later. But I'm bringing, and we'll talk in a minute about if that matters. Okay, which is the most important question we always ask. Baba Bakran. Okay, Tanur Rabbanan. Umi Katban. Who wrote these mizmorim? This is the classic state. Baba Bakra Yudal and Bed is the source that talks about who wrote all the different books of Tanakh. David כתב ספר תהילים על ידי 10 זקנים. ועל ידי אדם הראשון, ועל ידי מלכי צדק, ועל ידי אברהם, those names appear at the beginning of one mizmor each. ועל ידי איתן האזרחי, ועל ידי הימן, ועל ידי ידותן, I know a child with that name, ומשה ועל ידי אסף, ועל ידי שלושה בני קורח, okay? So we have all those Tehillim are written, but there also he has help from his friends, okay? There are other people that are also writing these Mizmorei Tehillim. Rashi there says the following, okay? על ידי 10 זקנים, כתבו בו דברים שאמרו זקנים הללו, שהיו לפניו. Meaning he recorded things down, says Rashi, that were written by other people before David. ויש שהיו בימיו, David, yeah. ויש שהיו בימיו, כגון אסף, והימן, וידותון, מן הנביאים המשוררים. And some of them were people who lived during his time. They were Levites living during his time, and he writes them down. Okay, so currently right now we're in that traditional opinion that it was David who's writing them all down, but not all the material belongs to David himself. Okay. And then when it says, and continue by Adam Rishon, I'm skipping down to that sentence, Adam Rishon Amran, it was Adam Rishon who wrote them. And it continues with all, it gives examples of all the Mizmorim that are said in the Gemara. Okay, so this Gemara expresses that more classic opinion, that it's David who's writing it all down, even though the token, the content, isn't all necessarily from David. Okay, one more commentary. That's a lie, two more. Kohelet Rabbah, okay? The part I want to bring here, which is important to me, is the last word. דבר אחר, החוכמה תעוז וחכם, זה דוד, מעשרה שליטים, מעשרה זקנים וצדיקים שאמרו בספר תהילים, right? There's a total of 10 people who are mentioned at the beginning of Mizmorei Tehillim that are not David. And then it names all of them, which we don't have to read because we already read it. And then it adds, echad hen, the last words, ve'ezra. Okay, there's an opinion in Kohelet Rabbah that Ezra also wrote Tehillim. Which, why did I bring that in? Because what does that mean? The writing of Mizmorei Tehillim went into what period? At least Second Temple period. Okay, so that is an opinion I'm bringing you from Kohelet Rabbah, which again, like all Midrashim, there's going to be a whole spectrum of opinions out there. Okay, so we have Ibn Ezra, writing medieval Spain. It doesn't all have to be by David, right? Meaning a lot of them don't have them there at all. So it's okay. It's also written by other people. We have the Bava Batra, the Gemara, which is presenting that it's not all his original work, but David is writing it all down. And then we have Kohelet Rabbah, which says, yeah, but also his Rabbah's writing these Mizmorei. And so we also have Second Temple thoughts in there.
I didn't hear what you said. And you said then we have Kohelet Rabbah
That says that also Ezra, so that brings in Second Temple. Okay, and lastly, we have the Malbim. Okay, well, that's the content is on the side. Now, the Malbim I'll bring, by the way, the Malbim is a fierce, staunch traditionalist. Okay, so for lots of historical reasons, he's refined to the world around him. So when he doesn't go with the classic opinion, it's noteworthy. And I'll bring him up again later when we talk about parallelism. Okay, so this is the following. וכתבתי זאת לגבול מעינינו טענות המלווים לאמור, איך ייתכן כי בימי דוד, בעוד המלכות על תוקפה וישראל על אדמתם, ועוד לא נגזרה גזרה, וכבר שרו על הדוכן ביטול המלכות וגלות צדקיהו במזמור ח"ט, וישבתם על נהרות בבל. He says, I have to respond to very real critics that say, there are Mizmorei Tehillim that are clearly describing events that are not in the time of David. You have to deal with that question if you're going to try and say that David wrote it. So what's the easy answer? It was prophecy. The easy answer was prophecy. Okay. So then the Malbim says, no, I'm not going to go there because we're talking about a book of Tehillim, and I can offer something else. אין הכרח שהיה הכל בימי דוד. כי כל עוד שהייתה נבואה בישראל עד חותם הנביאים מלאכי, זה עזרא היה צינור פתוח והלוויים המשוררים חלדו ברוח השם ודבריהם קודש. עד עזרא שחתם כתבי הקודש ומאז לא נוסף עליהם דבר. כי כל זה כפי דרך הפשט אשר במסילתו הלכנו את פירושנו. He says, why is it not difficult? Not because I have to say that David prophesied all them, but because there were other voices out there that had Ruach HaKodesh. There were Nevi'im, right? There was Ezra. They were this open funnel, this open channel for Ruach HaKodesh to come into the world. He said, including until Bayit Sheni. So therefore, if we have talking about Al Naharot Bavel, so yeah, it was written during Bayit Sheni. I don't have to jump through hoops to say something else. Last piece. So אולם אצלנו אמונה אומן כי 70 פנים לתורה וכפי דרך הדרוש והרמז והקבלה. כל המזמורים הללו כבר צפו במחזה הנביאים והמשוררים בני קורח ואסף בימי דוד, והיו גנוזים וצפונים בידי אנשי הרוח דור דור, עד עת שיצא הדבר אל הפועל, ואז נאמרו בקול רם על הדוכן, כל אחת בשעתה. Okay, but he offers still another opinion that it could be that they were all written really in prophecy, they were hidden, and then sort of like saw the light, they were able to come out to the world when they were relevant to the events that were happening. Okay, I'm just going to complete the last two lines here. נבעיין מה שכתבתי, שכבר בא יוצא בו בסימן י"ד, כי נוסד בימי דוד, ונאמר שנית בימי חזקיהו על דברי סנחריב, וכן תוכל לאמור בכל אלה שתחילה נאמרו בסתר, וחזרו וייסדו בגלוי, ונמסרו לכל עדת ישראל בקדושת הכתובים. Okay? So I'll tell you honestly, I'm not sure if there's two options of what I might be saying here. What? Yeah, Shannon. It says here that they were established in the time of David, and then they reappear in the time of Hiskiel, because we're going to talk about clear events that happened in those times. In the time of Hiskiel, where he speaks about the Mizmor speaks about Sancheriv, and basically they were written and then they were sort of hidden and they were concealed until they came out and were shown to all of Am Yisrael. So I don't know if he wants to totally reject the first idea about how maybe they weren't all written in the time of David. He presents both approaches. That you could say that there was a span of time during which these Tehillim were composed, or you could say that they were all written in the time of David, but they were sort of like hidden and put away, and then they came to light when they became relevant again. And that frames Tehillim as prophecy. Okay. Now, as I said, the Malbim in general, the Mamash Chashuvlo, to remain close and to cleave to more traditional approaches. I brought these all here. I don't think any one is necessarily much more authoritative than the other. I brought them all here because I think that they're important. I will speak about the authors, okay, of Tehillim. Speaking about the authors is, in one sense, perfectly in line with the traditional approach. There were clearly many people who wrote Tehillim. Many of these that we'll learn are not attributed to David. And I also think that when we assume that it must be that David wrote it, we often really narrow our scope about how we understand what actually is being said. Because we assume we know who said it exactly, we immediately put a lot of historical circumstances, and I'm not talking about Mizmor Nun Aleph that says in the Koteret, this is what was said to David, after he sinned with Bathsheba, which is its own question about the historical Mizmorim that have an event attached to them. But when we read it, Mizmor Tehillim that's not attributed to anybody, and we assume David HaMelech, it often, I think, really conceals a lot of times what we could see in front of us, and I don't think that it's necessary. Yes, Kathy.
One of the theories about Hebrew poetry, and then you can say,
Yeah.
it was something that was read publicly.
Sorry, next slide. Yeah.
And that if we can think about it like that, then you begin to think very differently about the poetry engine.
Yeah.
Something that was read publicly, possibly part of it, sort of riddles in which other people are supposed to respond. And that's the theory that's going on at the moment about the incredible poetry.
In medieval, yeah. So I'll also say that a lot of the medieval poetry, like inside in the text of the medieval poetry, they speak about their setting in, let's say, a party setting. Okay, so that's a little bit different. So let's ask that question though when it comes to Tehillim, and this brings us right to modern academic study. When I say modern, I mean like the 1800s onward. So modern here is the right term. Modern academic study of Sefer Tehillim, and it gets exactly to this point. So the main way that Tehillim has been studied in the academy, okay, for the past few hundred years, is through something called form criticism. A slight repeat of something we learned last year. Stay with me, okay? Academic study, university. Okay. So the main form of study is what we call form criticism. Now, form criticism is, I would say, very uninteresting, except that it's critical when it comes to studying Tehillim. And it goes as follows. Different Mizmorei Tehillim themselves attest to being spoken or speaking about a particular situation. Okay, so for example, I'll read you a little list. Okay. So we have all different types, we'll call them types, okay, it's a better phrase in form. there's all different types of Mizmorei Tehillim. And what academic study has done over the past many, many years, and I'll say also largely unsuccessfully, but I'll get to it in a moment, is that they, first of all, before doing anything with the Mizmor, tried to catalyze it as a type. Now, the running theory for many, many, many years, put forth initially by Hermann Gunkel, who was I don't know, wildly popular, successful German scholar. Most of modern academic Bible scholarship was born in Germany. I know it feels ironic, but it's just a fact. Today, still, the people who study Tanakh the most are, I'm saying in the Hebrew Bible, not even, right, is in Germany and in the Asian countries. Okay. So meaning most of the articles are coming out of those countries. Okay. So, so you have an attempt to take every Mizmor Tehillim and attach it a form. Now, why was it important? I may not explain what the different forms are. Why was this important? Because if I could figure out what type of Mizmor it was, I would also discover in what setting it was being said. Okay, so for example, all different examples, and I'll give you also a few numbers, but many more things. First, we have what in, like, it sounds like a Christian word, but it's not really, a hymn. Okay, a hymn is a hallelujah. Okay, it's a praise of God. So think about all the hallelujahs that we say in morning tefillot, which are all from Tehillim. Those are all considered to be hymns. They're all purely praises of God. Okay, just by one example, you can look inside again. I want us to like physically feel Mizmorei Tehillim. Mizmor Chet. I took most of them from the beginning, so we won't get lost in all the numbers. Okay, so if you look at Mizmor Chet, for example, in Mizmor 8, like the beginning of the book. Okay. Just one pasuk, okay? Here it's Lanatzeach al Haditit Mizmor LeDavid. We'll leave the first 3 words on the side, but it's again dedicated to David or spoken by David. Adonai Adonenu ma adil shimcha b'chol haaretz asher tna hodcha al hashamayim. Right? How great is your name, God, in the world, and your glory can be seen all over the heavens. Okay, that is a beginning of a hymn, of a praise of God. There are other types of hymns of praises. There are hymns that praise Yerushalayim as the capital of God. Okay, again, just by way of example, you can look at Mem Vav or listen to me read a pasuk. You don't have to flip if it's confusing. Look at Mem Vav. Okay. Let's get a good pasuk for that more. The whole thing praises Yerushalayim. But for example, the second pasuk, Elohim lanu machaseh va'od ezra b'tzarot nimtza me'od. No, that's not the right pasuk. Hold on one second. No, I think I wrote down the wrong pasuk. We'll leave it on the side for now. Trust me that maybe it's the previous one. Hold on, I'll look at one more and if not, we'll leave it on the side for now. No, I wrote down the wrong thing. But we have a number of things that praise Yerushalayim. Okay, so there are kinds of hymns, but they are specific to praise Yerushalayim and not to praise God. We have also Mizorim that are lamentations. They're kinot. Okay, they lament something. They often lament enemies that are oppressing us. We have laments that are individual. Those are the ones that interest me the most. We have laments that are individual, and we have laments that are communal. Like I'm lamenting my personal fate versus I'm lamenting the fate of the community. And many Mizmorim start off personal and then they get communal. Okay, which is an interesting reflection of how tefillah might have been said, or in what setting. Maybe it was being said in a public setting specifically, but we'll get to that in a minute. We have also Mizmor Todah, okay, a psalm of thanks, which is different than a hymn. A hymn is just saying, God, you're amazing. You're great, you're the best, okay? But a psalm of thanks will often take a specific scenario, speak about how difficult it was, and then praise God for helping someone emerge from that scenario. Some of them, again, are individual and some are communal. And then we have, and here we'll look at one example, we have what are called Mizmorei Melech, okay, Psalms of the King. Now, we say, for example, famously one of these before we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Now, for example, we can look at, let's say, the second Mizmor Tehillim.
Sorry, when you say second, Mizmor Tehillim, what do you mean? You mean like
Bets, Mizmor Bets.
Parak?
Parak Bet.
So we're in Parak Bet, and we're saying Mizmor Tehillim.
No, Mizmor means the parak.
But like,
going back and
I'm
forth.
saying small letters. Like, I don't know what a Mizmor is.
Mizmor is a psalm, so it's chapter 2. Tehillim is divided into these marine slash
Oh, right.
psalm slash the chapter. They all mean the same
So
thing.
both do.
So if I say
Got it.
pasuk or verse, it'll be the actual
Inside.
inside of it. Okay, thank you for clarifying. So I'm talking about Psalm 2, okay, chapter 2. So for example, I'll look at the second pasuk, okay, meaning pasuk bet within the second mizmor. Yetzavu malchei eretz ורוזנים נוסדו יחד על אדוני ועל משובחו. These are like classic phrases, okay, that the earthly kings will stand upright. Rosnim are sarim, their guards, will sort of come together in order to basically stand in command of Hashem, okay, of God and of he who he has appointed, okay? Now, why is this pasuk a good one to start with? Because the Mizmorei Melech are often a blur between seemingly actually praising a real king and praising God together, okay? So what is often thought, for example, the Mizmor that we read, I think it's Psalm, I think it's 83, but I don't remember. The Mizmor we read before we blow the shofar is a classic psalm of the king. Now, we have different ways to understand it. Maybe it was actually written to say in front of the king. Like the king would come and have an appearance and they would say that he's more Tehillim. But there's always this blurring of boundaries between the physical king and ultimately God as king. Because as we know, as very different from the ancient Near East, we wanted to make it very clear that God was the highest authority, as opposed to in many other ancient cultures where the king was a god. Okay, for us it was always the opposite. The king is not God. Okay, so a lot of the Hebrews sort of blur that, and they praise the physical king, but then they always end up praising God himself. Okay, so that's its own set. And yes, let's say in scholarship they'll assume that it was probably said for an actual king. You had a question, or you're stretching? Okay, so two other examples.
It was said for an action.
So yes, okay, so sometimes, possibly. Another one are wisdom psalms, okay? So for example, the first Mizmor Tehillim, I kind of want to do this one next week, but I'm still debating, okay? So it starts off very, very unusual for Mizmor Tehillim. Many think it's also not even really a Mizmor Tehillim, but it was an introduction that was put at the beginning of the book for multiple reasons. Ashrei Ha'ish, right, the beginning, the first pasuk of all Tehillim. Ashrei Ha'ish asher lo halach be'atzat l'shaim u'bederech chata'im lo amad. He says, lucky is the man who does not go in the advice or in the ways of the evil or those who sin, and he does not stand in the company of the cynics. Okay, that is the opening pasuk. It sounds much more like Mishlei than it sounds like Tehillim, right? It's giving you advice. Like, don't hang out with the bad crap. Okay. So we have a number of those kinds of Mizmorim, of those psalms in the book of Tehillim. They're all meant to teach a lesson and be didactic. The last one we have are historical psalms. Now, those are psalms which are very long, and they are sort of like these historical surveys of things that happen. So we famously have a Mizmor in Tehillim, a psalm in Tehillim that actually surveys the whole Egypt story. Okay, now the part that of course fascinates scholars is that there's a different amount of plagues in Tehillim than there are in Torah. And there's a number of differences between the Mizmor Tehillim and what we have in Sefer Shemot. So I'm going to leave you with that nugget and not do anything about it right now.
It's like iron, what number?
Yeah,
is it?
exactly. I think it's Ayin Chet, it's 88.
Wow.
Okay, so just as we can open that for a second, okay? But I'm not going to address the one I
We're
brought up.
drifting, it's started.
Okay,
Can you just, while we're flipping, can you clarify what you mean about the wisdom?
yeah, so the wisdom psalm, by the way, it's not Ayin Chet, that's a different one. I'll find it. No, the one on Pesach is 100 and not true. Maybe it's 106 or 5. I'll have to look for a minute. What I said about the wisdom one is that there are these Mizmorim that are openly didactic, like they're openly trying to tell you how to behave, as opposed to, again, someone lamenting their personal fate, which is a totally different way of speaking. These Mizmorim that are very in your face, trying to tell you what you should do and how you should behave, much more like the book of Mishlei than the book of Tehillim.
And just like one clarifying question, in these like distinctions that you're making, is there like with the first words, something that tells us, oh, this is all historical song and this is a wisdom, or this is just a division that you know from looking into it and studying it, from being into it?
Okay, so that's a great question. So there is language that often signals. So for example, Ashrei Ha'ish, lucky is the man, is a classic wisdom literature phrase, okay? So there are catchphrases, but sometimes also you just read the content and then you say, oh, this is that kind of mizmor, okay? So sometimes it's the content itself, and sometimes there's actual phrases that signal to the reader that we've reached this kind of mizmor, okay? Another question? Yeah,
I don't know if you said.
tell me your name. We've spoken a little bit, I forget.
Okay, Almira.
Remember the conversation though. Yeah.
I'm curious, if, I don't know if you said it, but if there's any connection to the number. Like what the song is and what number it is? And
No.
how do they configure the order?
Okay, so this is a
Because
great
every, like, number
question.
is like,
It's
you
a
know,
great question that I don't have a genuine answer to give you. I said that we have other like collections of Tehillim, that there may be a few others that didn't make it in, or that maybe it was one needs more divided into two. We said that it maybe a little bit before you came. I do not think that one needs to look into the meaning of the number itself. If the mizmor that opens Tehillim should be looked at of why is this the mizmor that was chosen to be in the beginning of Tehillim, but we need to not run away from saying this is a collection that was put together as a collection, possibly, yes, during by Cheney times, and to look at sort of like the broad strokes of the beginning or the ends. Why end the collection of Tehillim with the collection of hallelujahs, for example? That's the ending 8 prakim. But I do not think there's significance to what is 104. Yeah, no, not at all. I don't think that the person writing it initially had any idea what number it was going to be. Do you know what I'm saying? It's two totally different time periods. Okay. Okay, so let's just think for a minute about that import, about form criticism, what that gave us, what it doesn't give us. Okay, so in terms of what it gave us, so first of all, what's fascinating is that, yes, we do know that we had Levi'im. Okay, we had Levites who sang. They were somehow singing in sort of like the backdrop of the Mikdash, okay, of the temple. Now, we don't know exactly what they said, right? We have a tradition, let's say that they said Mizmor Shir, right, Liyom X, and those are all, right, the song of the day that we say that in the Tefillah, and those are all Mizmorei Tehillim. We don't have necessarily clear traditions about what else they said. It's possible that they were saying a certain collection of Mizmorei Tehillim. That is 100% a possibility. Again, it says in Divrei Yamim, it says in Tehillim Melachim, they were singing, they were busy singing, but we don't know exactly what they were saying. So it's very possible that some of them were Mizmorei Tehillim. What it seems is unlikely, which is going to seem very unexciting for all of us, but it's very important for scholarship, is that none of these Mizmorim speak about like sacrificial worship in the sense that they're accompanying a sacrifice. Let me say that differently. Mizmorei Tehillim do not support the theory that along with, let's say, shechting, there were like, what's the word in English? Not cantations. Is that the word? Is that the word? That there were like cantations. There were like these songs or the chants, thank you, that were accompanying them. Which is important for scholars because it like continually supports the idea that our worship in the Mikdash was like very different than all other worship that existed, which always had singers accompanying the sacrifices, okay? But the Mizmorei Tehillim support the idea that whatever singing and poetry that was done that is likely somehow connected to like the world of worship wasn't actually combined with the actual worship. Like they were two very different disciplines. Again, not so exciting for us, it's very exciting for scholarship. The other piece is, what does all this not tell us? So it does give us direction, and I think that it helps me like think about Mizmorei Tehillim in a way that's much clearer. But what happened with scholarship is that they got very, very, very stuck up on the definitions themselves. And many Mizmorei Tehillim are a combination of the things that I presented to you so neatly in separate categories, okay? So you'll have a personal lamentation, and then it ends with 3 psukim of a hymn, okay? And they got very stressed about it. And so what academics do when they get stressed about it is that they want to cut it up into different pieces and say that, well, that was a hymn and that was a personal lamentation, and then they put them together. And that's just very unnecessary. And recently in scholarship, they've also come to that conclusion. It's not only something that maybe is additional learning we don't want to get into, but it's also very necessary. Like, it is okay that not everything more fits into like a perfect category. It's sort of like the academic whole falling on itself. Okay, so form criticism is helpful until it's not helpful. Okay, until we say, oh, this is just like a mix of a whole lot of stuff. Let's leave the form criticism on the side and just take it for what it is. Okay, so that's largely how we're going to study. I'll usually start with how can we classify this means more, but it largely becomes uninteresting, okay, for what we're actually gonna want to say. So that's what I'd say about form criticism, and it's important, but only up until a point. Where are we? I'm feeling we're ending. Okay, so we'll end with a teeny bit of PowerPoint, which I think we lost at this point. Did we lose it? It's not anywhere. Hold on 1 second. Let's see if we can get it. If not, I'll just say a few things, come up?
Yeah.
Great, okay. 5 minutes. Oh, now you just twice. Hold on, I'll turn that off. I know, I'll take it down. No, it's on the computer.
Let's go, Richard.
Okay, I didn't have time this morning. I had to leave my house at 7:50. Okay, biblical poetry. I'll probably continue with a little bit more next time, but there are certain basics, like rudimentary basics, that we have to understand in order for any poetic text in Tanakh to make sense to us. I'm going to skip most of what I had here, which is really fine. But hold on, I want to go back. I think Kathy said this before. So no, you said this before. We have a question, okay? First of all, how do you know when meeting a poetic text in Tanakh? We're going to ask that question in a minute. We're going to end with it. But we also have this question that when something is defined as a shir, okay, which in Hebrew is a poem, does it possibly mean that it was also something that was sung, okay? And this is a very, very, very great possibility. Again, can we like prove it? Probably not. But it's very possible that these things that are, again, as Yashir Moshe for Shirat Hayam was clearly sung, okay? But that theory is put forward, possibly have these Tehillim. They were very, again, think about hymns in, whatever of Christian masses, or I don't even have the right words, it's embarrassing, you could help me, Kathy. But in their tefillot, right, in church, right, that's very possibly what was done for Mizrei Tehillim. So one thing that I'll say is that after a lot of effort, let's say academia came to the conclusion that they can't really come up with any clear meter, okay? Meaning, right, what's one of the main marks of poetry is the meter, right? Dun, 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 right? Whatever the meter is and all the names we can give it, iambic or whatever. So there is no clear meter in Tanakh, and they had a very hard time trying to come up with something. So we kind of put that marker on the side. So it's not meter that helps us know that we've come up to a poetic text. But what we do have, and we'll start this and maybe open with it a little bit next time, is parallelism, okay? Here's just an example of, let's say, how do we know, for example, okay, we open up of Sefer Bereshit and we have, right, a regular pasuk, Vayiben Adonai Elohim et hatzel asher lakach min ha'adam li'isha vayivea el ha'adam, right, that the rib was taken from man and then she's brought to man. There's something that's sort of, it's just telling you as it is, it's telling you the story. And then we have Vayomer ha'adam, the next pasuk. What does he say? Zot ha'pa'am etzem me'atzamai uvasar mibsari lezot yikarei isha ki me'ish lukacha zot. Okay, this pasuk, which the translation is right here, is clearly of a different nature than the one that comes before it. Okay, now the question is how? How do I define it in words? Like how can I make that clear? So first of all, we have the use of the word zot. Okay, or we have the word as, for example, let's say an as yashir. It's sort of like this exclamation word, which is not something that that Tanakh uses in its regular psukim. I've divided it up for you in these lines. It's obviously not how it looks if you open it up in your Tanakh. It's just on a line, but that would be a mistake because it's a poem, okay? So zot ha'pam, you could also put, by the way, etzem yatzamai in the next line. We have here the repetition, okay? Etzem yatzamai, you have words repeated in Tanakh, so that's not necessarily the only reason why it becomes a poem. And flesh of my flesh,
And she will be called Isha because from Ish, right, she was taken. Now, it's hard to define though, what exactly about this, right? What about it is poetic, but do you agree with me that it sounds different than the previous pasuk, or you don't even see it yet? You don't see it. We're not all. Some of us get it, some of us we're not into it, okay? There is the, let's say like this, first of all, the phrases or not the phrases, that's not the right word in English. I'll think of it. The smaller units, the subunits of the pasuk need to be broken up. Meaning, if I just read Uvasali psali lezoti karaisha, it doesn't make any sense. Meaning I have to pause here in order to read the next line. It's not a continual plot description in the way that this previous pasuk is. That's going to be like a content marker for me of how I've gotten to poetry. I'll give a clearer example. This one's a little bit of a trickier one, and then I know we have to end. I'm going to skip all this for now. Okay, so for example, this is classic biblical prophecy from the book of Yoel. Oh yeah, okay, it's verse 12 and 13. Hakitzu shikorim u'bchu vehililu kol shotei yain. Okay, rise drunkards and weep and wail all drinkers of wine. Now this is classic in that it basically says something very similar. Okay, the phrase shikorim gets repeated in shotei yain. One is that they're drunks, one is that they drink wine. Okay, this is what is classically biblical parallelism, where we're saying sort of the same thing in two different ways. One more example, chibru v'siftu kohanim. You need to, it's a terrible translation. You need to become ready and also possibly to eulogize, speaking to the kohanim. Heilu mishaltei mizbeach. Okay, and also wail, bemoan, because they're behaving improperly, those who serve the mizbeach. Okay, kohanim and mishaltei mizbeach are clearly speaking about the same group of people. So I'll just end with this, and we'll continue with it a little bit next time before we move on to our Mizmor Tehillim, which is that how do we understand the correlation between these two halves? Are we supposed to understand that each half is saying something different from the other? Is one of them perhaps strengthening, and it's basically the same thing, but it's just speaking poetically and it's repeated twice? Very often we'll see that the second phrase speaks in a little bit more detail than the first. Okay, so shikorim shotei yain is much more, right? It's been explained as a phrase much more. Mishaltei mizbeach explains or details what a kohen is. Now, just the last sentence is that the main mark, which we'll briefly explore next time, the main mark of biblical poetry is parallelism, of saying the same thing in different words. But we have this question, is it the same thing in different words, or should we understand it as somewhat different? Sometimes it can just be a repetition of words in different words, a repetition of ideas in different words, or is it going to be telling us something different? All of biblical poetry is written in parallelism. You can't get away from it. That is the main form. It's not meter, it's not rhyme. Sometimes you have rhyme, it's parallelism. And that's how we know that we've hit some sort of poetic text. And this question of how we interpret it is going to be the key in how we look at the importance of every word or every part of a sentence in the Mizmor and how we're able to understand it. Okay, so happy to take any more questions. Anyone wants to run out, please feel free, and the Dr. Shem will continue next week. I'm here, I'm going to. Yeah.
That.
So the rest of the slides, which I'll bring next week, is that Hillel tended towards that idea of omniscience, where every single phrase is important. Like that is one like the thought and Chazal. It's when and therefore, all of the medieval Parshanim read that, even Ezra, they all go according to that. That